What if Joseph never forgave his brothers? Picture a grain-yellow wind sweeping across an empire, warehouses groaning with harvest, and a masked ruler on a high stone dais watching a line of hungry strangers approach. Imagine those strangers are his brothers. Imagine he knows it, they don't, and his chest aches with a decade of old betrayals. Now pause that moment, frozen like dust hung in a sunbeam. Because in the story many of us know, the next frames are drenched in tears and a long embrace. But what happens if that embrace never comes? What unravels when mercy is withheld at the hinge of history? Before we turn the hinge, let's open the door to the familiar hallway of the narrative. In the book of Genesis, Joseph is the beloved son of Jacob, adorned with a richly colored coat and wrapped in dreams that set him apart. He dreams of sheaves bowing and stars bending, images that sound like poetry but feel like provocation to his older brothers. Jealousy sharpens into a plan by a dry well on a hot day. They strip him of his coat, consider blood and rocks, then settle on silver and distance, a caravan bound south to Egypt. The story follows Joseph down into the churn of a foreign world and a string of reversals that would feel implausible if they weren't so human. In Egypt, he serves in the house of Potiphar, rises by diligence, falls by accusation, and descends into prison. There, dreams return like birds who know the way home. He interprets the dreams of a cupbearer and baker, truthful forecasts that plant a memory in the palace. When Pharaoh himself is troubled by visions of fat cows swallowed by thin ones and plump ears of grain devoured by withered stalks, Joseph is summoned. He reads the riddle as 7 years of plenty followed by 7 of famine, and he proposes a calm, practical response. Gather, store, prepare. Pharaoh sets Joseph at his side, a signet on his finger and authority in his breath. In the years of abundance, Joseph fills the storehouses until the grain is like sand, uncountable. When the famine grips the region, Egypt becomes a pantry for a starving world. The famine reaches Canaan. Jacob, old and haunted by the absence of a favorite son he believes dead, hears that there is grain in Egypt. He sends the brothers, minus Benjamin, their father's new treasure. They arrive in the court of the governor, not recognizing the brother they once sold. The text slows down here, like footsteps soft on stone. Joseph recognizes them. He speaks through an interpreter. He questions. He tests. He keeps Simeon as collateral and sends the others back with sacks of grain and a secret silver cup, a moral mirror they will have to look into on their return. The second journey brings Benjamin in tow and a plea from Judah, a brave, trembling speech offering himself in exchange for the boy's freedom. It's the kind of moment where a family's story is reborn. And finally, in the canonical version, Joseph breaks. He sends the servants away, embraces his brothers, weeps so loudly that the palace hears, and speaks words that generations would clutch like a lifeline. You intended harm, but there was a larger good at work. From that embrace, a path opens. The family is reunited. Jacob rejoices. The clan moves to Goshen with Pharaoh's blessing. And the people who will be known as Israel begin a long sojourn in Egypt. This sets a stage for later chapters. Another Pharaoh, harder and unknowing. Burdens that will require a deliverer. A liberating night remembered as Passover. A mountain of law. A nation's identity welded in hardship, hope, and covenant. Now let's step into the speculative. Freeze the scene just before the reveal. Joseph stands high, the brothers kneel, the interpreter repeats what he already knows. In this alternate line, Joseph's memories tighten like a fist. He thinks of the roughness of that well, the sting of the naked sun, the taste of being sold. He thinks of how power is fragile in court and family is even more fragile in the heart. He has learned in Egypt that protection sometimes comes from distance. So instead of tears, he chooses a mask. He keeps the mask. He sells them grain. No more, no less. He insists that Benjamin remain as surety, a decision that shakes the brothers but does not break them. They had, after all, once rationalized a sale. He refuses to reveal his identity. He returns Simeon in an exchange, as policy, not as grace. The silver cup appears again in a sack, a test repeated, and this time the governor's judgment is cold, procedural. Whoever holds the cup must stay. Judah pleads. He is brave and eloquent. But the man on the dais answers in statutes, not tears. The brothers leave with grain, but leave Benjamin behind, and they step out into a wind that feels like the end of a story. Back in Canaan, the famine bites deeper. Jacob, already time-worn, collapses beneath a new weight. He had once believed he lost Joseph. Now, he loses Benjamin. Grief does what it often does. It makes the world small. The family's camp becomes quiet and brittle. Some of the brothers splinter away to protect their households. Others stay, thin with resolve and regret. The herds dwindle. The wells give dust. Neighbors who were once trading partners are now competitors for scant pasture. A clan famous for tents and tales becomes a handful of fires in the night. In Egypt, Joseph continues his work with the same careful excellence. He cannot unsee what trauma taught him, how quickly favor changes, how a kind word in court must be measured. He thinks perhaps that by keeping his identity hidden, he is protecting not only himself, but the delicate order he built for millions who now rely on the storehouses. He will not risk becoming a private man in a public crisis. He watches from a balcony as the grain flows into the hands of the poor. He hears the name Jacob in rumor and wrestles with it in the dark. The famine runs its course over 7 years. In Canaan, the cost is visible. The brothers age fast. Children are born, but fewer survive. The old songs are still sung, but their words feel looser in the mouth. The promise whispered to Abraham, descendants like the stars, is not revoked in a speculative tale like this, but it is obscured. The numbers will not swell quickly in Egypt. There will be no later Pharaoh to fear them. Instead, this family grows like thorn bushes in rock, slowly, stubbornly, with fewer branches than expected. As the rains return, there is no dramatic relocation to Goshen to bind this family into a single people under a foreign sky. There is no fertile Nile delta to cradle their multiplication. Instead, the brothers and their families rebuild in place, scattered among friendly and unfriendly towns. They carry forward their stories of the God of their fathers, but they lack the unifying pressure cooker of Egypt's later oppression. Identity in this case becomes regional, not national. The tribes that later readers would recognize begin as looser networks. They share blood and memory, but not the same hard crucible that, in the canonical version, forged them together under the weight of bricks and a shared cry for deliverance. In this timeline, what does worship look like? Without the Exodus as a formative trauma and triumph, there is no Passover inscription on the calendar. There is no night of bitter herbs to remember slavery. No annual retelling of a God who threshes sea from sea. Instead, the family commemorates the famine years. They remember a severe drought that tested them, and they speak with mixed feelings of a distant Egyptian governor who dealt fairly but coldly. The moral ceremonies that spring up are quieter. They mark survival, not liberation. Their altars are built from small stones, not mountain fire. Egypt changes too. Joseph's administrative genius still saves millions. The granaries empty into hungry hands. Fields are reallocated. Political structures centralize as people trade land for bread. But something is missing in the palace tales. The rumor of a tearful reunion that softened a ruler and warmed a court is replaced by an image of a perfectly efficient man. Joseph remains admired, perhaps even feared, but he is not the hearth at the center of a family's survival. A single act withheld ripples forward. Fewer Judean shepherds in Goshen, fewer Hebrew lullabies along the Nile, fewer names carved into the registry of a people within a people. The long arc continues. Centuries pass. Without a large Israelite presence in Egypt, there is no later oppressive turn that requires a dramatic deliverer. A figure like Moses, if he appears, emerges from different edges, a desert tribe's lawgiver, rather than a prince of Egypt. The law he gives, if such a law is given at all in this speculative world, is less a national constitution born at Sinai, and more a collection of ancestral wisdom. Stories, proverbs, and modest codes passed down orally and set in writing as neighbors press in. Without the thunder of Sinai and the shared march through the sea, there is less to weld 12 into one. The tribes, when they form, are confederations of cousins with varied customs, not a nation forged in a single fire. And what of the line of Judah, that golden thread so many traditions trace with care? Judah, in our speculation, carries a heavy regret without the redemption arc that Joseph's forgiveness once granted him. He still has children. His line does not evaporate. But the moral transformation sparked by his plea in the court, offering himself for Benjamin, does not become a public pivot that lifts the whole family. Instead, it is a private virtue in a small circle, meaningful, but not mythic. Later kings, if kings emerge, rise slower. Their songs have more dust in them. The poetry of a later David, if he sings, is composed in a quieter village, for fewer ears, because a nation's great hall took longer to be built. This is not to say nothing noble thrives. Human stories carry both weight and light. Mercy missing in one generation often reappears in another. A grandson forgives an uncle over a goat. A sister feeds a neighbor's child during a lean season. The binding that should have happened in an Egyptian palace happens instead in backyards, decades later, in smaller, tender gestures. The community that emerges is more decentralized, less known to history's grand narrators, but still capable of kindness. Now pause with me at the hinge again, and consider how fragile the mechanism is. A single decision in a single room, the choice to forgive or to hold back, doesn't just change how one day ends. It changes the vocabulary a people inherits for centuries. In the canonical story, Joseph's forgiveness becomes a lighthouse. When later generations feel the pull toward revenge or the drift of bitterness, they can point to a man who had every reason to punish and chose an embrace instead. That story doesn't just teach, it hums in the bones. In our alternate line, that lighthouse is dimmer. People still find their way, but by smaller stars. At this point, I want to hear from you. If you were in Joseph's sandals, scarred by betrayal, tasked with feeding a nation, would you reveal yourself to your brothers, or keep the mask on to protect what you built? Share your thoughts below, and if you enjoy these careful, respectful what-ifs that make us think about the past and our present, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next journey. Let's return to consequences, because history is the echo of choices. Without reconciliation in Egypt, how does neighboring Canaan view this family? Fewer caravans speak of remarkable Hebrews favored in Pharaoh's court. Diplomatic ties that might have formed over kin in Goshen never materialize. A myth of the north, a people delivered by miracles, doesn't spread. Instead, local narratives dominate. Each valley has its own tales, and the hills do not agree on everything. The map of belief is a patchwork quilt stitched by many hands. That can be beautiful, but it also means slower mobilization against common threats. When larger empires loom, the Confederation's response is less coordinated. They bend sooner, not necessarily breaking, but accommodating and adapting. Literature shifts as well. In a world where Joseph embraced his brothers, later scribes preserve the story as a major artery of meaning. In a world where he withheld mercy, the written tradition keeps the famine account. But without the hug, the narrative stands as a cautionary tale about prudence grown too cautious. Early teachers emphasize the necessity of compassion alongside wisdom. They tell children not only that families can hurt us, but that families are where healing can multiply. The absence of Joseph's forgiving embrace doesn't erase forgiveness from the cultural lexicon. It makes it more urgent a lesson to teach intentionally, rather than to inherit instinctively. There's an irony in all this. Joseph's caution, in this reimagining, is not villainy, it's understandable. He would be protecting himself, his office, the precarious order of a famine-struck world. Many of us would recognize the logic. What's dangerous isn't the caution itself, but how, over time, it can calcify into a posture that keeps love at arm's length. The ultimate cost is not only to one family's reunion, but to the mythic oxygen that future generations breathe. Without him saying, "I am Joseph," the air is thinner for a while. And yet hope is stubborn. Even here there are seeds of renewal. After the famine, word filters back to Egypt of a patriarch's death in Canaan. Jacob has passed. In the canonical story, the brothers fear revenge after their father's burial. Forgiveness must be reaffirmed. In our alternate story, Joseph hears of the funeral on the breeze of trade. He sits alone and imagines a caravan that never came, a blessing he never received, and the hand of a father on his head. Regret is its own famine. Perhaps he sends one more wagon of grain north, quietly, disguised as a merchant's gift. it arrives without a signature. The brothers, older now, take the sacks and wonder if the same governor who was cold was also, perhaps, not unkind. They teach their children a complicated lesson. Sometimes goodness is hidden. Sometimes we do not see a person's face when they help us. Centuries later, storytellers in this world sing two kinds of songs. One is about prudence and planning, about the wisdom to build storehouses in years of plenty. The other is about bridges, how hard they are to build, how easy they are to burn, how essential they are when storms come. Joseph appears in both songs. He is the architect of survival and the silhouette on a balcony who never came down the stairs. Both versions instruct. Both versions make listeners tilt their heads and ask, "What would I do?" What does this teach us now, sitting far from Pharaoh's courts and desert wells? It suggests that forgiveness is not a side note in history. It is a load-bearing beam. Systems matter. Grain counts, supply lines, policies. But the willingness to put one's heart at risk matters too. The grand narratives we inherit are braided from both kinds of threads. Remove one, and the rope still holds for a while. Remove both, and it frays faster than we expect. This episode, like all in this series, is a respectful speculation, not doctrine. It's a way of holding a story up to the light and asking how shadows change when we turn it a few degrees. When Joseph forgives, we see one glow. When he doesn't, we see the outline of what could be lost and what might, in time, be found in other ways. Sometimes, by imagining how things might have gone wrong, we better understand why going right mattered so much. If you walk away with one picture, let it be that paused moment in the court. The man at the top of the stairs, the brothers below, the interpreter between, the warehouse doors at the edge of the frame. In one world, he descends, and the air fills with the sound of weeping and laughter braided together. In the other, he turns, and the work continues in measured silence. History hums along either way, because it always does. But the melody changes. In one, there's a theme of reconciliation that generations hum under their breath. In the other, the theme takes longer to learn and must be written later by other hands. And for us, people with our own small courts and our own dusty thresholds, the question returns, quietly and insistently. When we have the chance to forgive, to name ourselves, to step toward those who once stepped away from us, what do? We may not feed a nation. We may never stand before a pharaoh. But the families, teams, and neighborhoods we belong to are their own empires of consequence. One embrace, one letter, one phone call can sometimes do for a life what warehouses of grain do for a city. They keep a winter from becoming a lifetime. So we close the door gently on this what if, grateful for the canonical story's warmth, newly aware of how a single act of mercy can echo through centuries. The world is full of hinges. May we be careful, and when we can, may we choose the ones that open toward reconciliation.